I wonder if every piece of functionality that you add to a space is its own hmm, how do you say, gen server. Uh, what we have now is, where is it? Test support. Okay. We have these constructs, high-level constructs, to say, okay, we want these things in the game, but these things are kind of complicated design. They might have some behavior, so we're expecting that the platform will create these, but when it comes to creating a game like this game countdown, just pulling it in doesn't make it automatically work, right? You need a timer. And so do you put the timer inside the server, the game state that we have? Like, I'm having trouble separating like where things go. And then what if you have multiple timers? It could make the gen server that we have very busy. So I have this other idea. What if every construct had its own JSON file, and every JSON file for the construct spawns up a new gen server? So you could have a space with several dozen, maybe even hundreds of lightweight gen servers that are maintaining the state of that construct. So different timers, even maybe different games. And so what is a example construct JSON? So maybe we have the name is of the construct. Is there a way that I can format allow property keys to not be double quoted? Let me do a quick search. VS Code allow JSON property keys. Seek suggestion. We also perform structural value settings here. Format on type. Allow closing brackets. Package. Quick navigation. Full JSON with comments. This mode is just settings JSON with comments. You can use single as well as the current editor. Oh well, it's a minor thing. VS Code allow no quoting on I don't know. Maybe it has to have one. Okay, fine, whatever. Name is name of the construct. Let's say tic-tac-toe. And then what? It has to have some listeners, like on launch or something. Do the following. So we need to, this might be a list. And it might be another array of something. So we want to call a command, and it might be create cube, and then have a list of arguments. So it's almost like function and a list of arguments. And this might be the position, which can be something like this. I feel like this is getting a little cryptic. On launch, give a list of, maybe we have to say the command or which API. So this might be the scene API. So the API is, well, forget about the API. Let's just see what is the thing you want to do. So command is create box. And then it takes some args. And it could be position. X is, or maybe it can just be, yeah, we'll do this. X is, 1, Y is something else, 0 or 1.5, and Z is, I don't know, 2 or something. So on launch, create box, it needs a name. Let's say 00. So you've got to create these individually, or you can create a grid maybe. And this thing might take some, it might have a schema, which is like it itself has a instance name. Which is a string. And it might have position, which is a vector 3, a rotation, which is a vector 3, maybe we even allow scale. And maybe we give it a label. And maybe we allow sound. or base color, and this can be a string. Maybe we allow changing the win sound URL. This is a string. It could be the draw sound URL. And oops, play sound or turn sound URL. Take a turn. Take turn sound URL. So this is the parameterization of this gizmo, things that you can pass in. And so maybe we create a bunch of these boxes. 0, 0. What's wrong with this? Expected comma somewhere. Oh. Okay, so on launch, we create this box. Copy. Let's just create 3 of them for now. So first, let's see, first row, second column. First row, third column. We gotta move these over a little bit. So if this is at let's see, 0, maybe this is at 1, this is at 2, and the rest of them, height remains the same, depth remain the same. Okay, so we got, this tells the front end what to draw. Well, we might also need to set variables to say that these are nothing. So you could also, I mean, maybe you don't have to set them on launch. So now what? You have these boxes, and they're drawn into the scene, and then you can listen. So on point, we want to do some things. When comments are not presented, how do you allow VS Code allow comments in JSON? Parser. File associations JSON with JSON-C. Preferences, settings. That ain't it. JSON. Associate schemas to JSON. What? By adding the following settings. Associate schemas to JSON files in the current project. Cool. Okay, when user points and clicks. So on point. So I feel like when you do something like this, it should be a way to specify you're pointing at one of these things, right? Should we create a box and put the on point inside it? But we're repeating ourselves for this, aren't we? Could we, for example, make a tic-tac-toe box, which is just the box? That might be kind of overkill. You're creating alone. You want to group it together into a game. So you want to tap into the behavior. You're clicking on something. All right, let me take a break. I'm back. So here we're creating some assets. Clearly this is on the front end. We're creating boxes and we want to capture some kind of input. So on launch, this happens. On point, I think we want to restrict it to the things that you created. So maybe it passes along the name, but it filters by this thing. So what if it was on point and you get a function called, but of course we can't define a function here. So maybe we can just say that the function will get the name, and what do we want to do with it? We want to set a variable and this has to have a key, which can be the name of the box and a value, which can be another. So you end up making these kind of like secret, tricky naming things because you can't use an imperative. You can't tell it how to do it in a declarative syntax. You have to have a secret language for, okay, how do I set this to be that other thing, right? Sometimes you can use some kind of syntax like $, get the variable of next player symbol. So maybe in the on launch you set variable, and the key is current symbol, and the value is, let's say, x. And we'll also set a variable for the next symbol, where that'll be a value of O. Then we create some boxes, and then any way of saying pointed mesh dot name. But then there's conditions to this, because let's say you point on something and you set its value to current, what is it called? Current symbol. What you also need to do then is swap the symbols. So swap variables. First is current symbol, swap its value with second, which is current next symbol. See, these are in a way all harder to use, especially this. How am I supposed to know that this exists? So it's quite difficult, I think, to create a declarative language like this without first specifying on point. Like, you'd have to know by convention that whenever you do an on point, you're going to be passed in the mesh name. Unless you put this in here. Yeah, programming you just requires some imperative style unless you can really make this clear. It kind of makes sense that if you put the pointer outside, you need to pass it a function. But if you just have a create box, it's got name position, but it's just also listening. It could be, it has the on point. Maybe you just toggles, or it has some metadata. So you can create a box and it just holds some metadata on it. Like it's X or O. It's still kind of tricky. Doing this in a pure declarative way is still tricky. I don't think people can learn how to use this. And then you got to maintain it. People can use JavaScript. But then with the JavaScript, where do you execute it? You can execute it in a web worker. Yeah, so I think this is just too hard. Coming up with this thing is hard. I mean, how many different kind of ways do we want to do this? So you can point at something, you can set variables, swap variables. And this thing is taking care of the communication for you. So it's and you don't have to worry about installing it. It's secure and safe. Maybe what we need is a definition. I need to define what a box is. Definitions. And then you say, sorry, I might have multiple. The name of this definition is a tic-tac-toe box. And in this thing, I have a constructor. Or maybe just some on launch stuff. On launch. And you would say create the box. And this thing can have a schema. I think it would need at least the position. And then yeah, maybe it takes the sound. We'll get to that later. So then you create a box, and it needs a name. Pass in the name. Yeah, we can't do this. So how do you name this? This is still hard. I don't think this is a reasonable path forward. We have to allow people to write JavaScript. Because at least they can get things done. They'll just do it in the web worker. And the JavaScript won't be able to execute the going through. We have to send everything back as messages. But at least it's a pass forward. Okay, I think this is a dead end. I don't think I can get this to work. Don't save. So is everything a JavaScript construct? Okay, let's go with that idea. If you have maybe people write assets. Put it somewhere. Assets, and let's say constructs. Or maybe we're just saving them in the database. Let me just create a folder here called constructs. And test or tic-tac-toe .js. People can write JavaScript. And so can they write, maybe they can write TypeScript. They can say class tic-tac-toe constructor takes some kind of input, source, or maybe it just needs to export a function. Say. It's going to be hosted on the web. Probably just JavaScript. It needs to no, I like a class better. So it can return, it needs to be able to have some kind of subscribe. And then it needs to have some kind of run. So here you can set up anything you want. And then when you subscribe, so return a list of kinds of events we're interested in. Then we have to have a handler. Some kind of message and handle the shape of messages that come through. I think what you'll get is maybe a socket so you can communicate back out. And then in here, say socket, public socket. We'll just give you one. And this socket, broadcast or something. So this will get registered for you. It will connect you to the room's WebSocket, and then you can write some code that will define your experience. Then you can write as much JavaScript as you want. Have your own timers. Spam the server. That wouldn't be good. Does JavaScript have classes? Yeah, it doesn't. So worker is an object created using a constructor worker that runs a named JavaScript file. This file contains the code that will run in the worker thread. Worker is in another global context that is different from the window, thus using window structure to get the global scope. Instead of stuff within a worker will return an error. It is represented by a dedicated worker global scope object in the case of dedicated workers. Standard workers that are utilized by a single script. Shared workers use shared worker global scope. A dedicated worker is only accessible from the script that first spawned it, whereas shared workers can be accessed from multiple scripts. You can run whatever code you like inside the worker thread, with some exceptions. For example, you can't directly manipulate the DOM or use some default methods and properties of the window object, but you can use a large number of items available under window, including WebSockets. Data is sent between workers and the method via a system of messages. Both sides send their messages using the post message method and respond via the on message event handler. Data is copied rather than shared. Workers may in turn spawn new workers. Dedicated workers. As mentioned above, a dedicated worker is only accessible by the script that called it. In this section, we'll discuss the JavaScript found in our basic dedicated worker example. Run dedicated worker. This allows you to enter two numbers to be multiplied together. The numbers are sent to a dedicated worker, multiplied together, and the results is returned to the page and displayed. This example is rather trivial, but we decided to keep it simple while introducing you to the basic worker concept. Worker feature detection for more controlled error handling and backwards compatibility is a good idea. Wrap your worker accessing code in the following main.js. If window worker const my worker new worker worker.js. First on change worker post message first and second value. Second on change and my worker on message receive message from worker. Yeah, you don't need WebSocket. You could just do this on message thing, because otherwise we'd have to hold two sockets open. We don't want to do that. So we don't want to do this. We just communicate back with the parent. So you take a message, and then you return a payload to the parent. So in here, you do all kinds of stuff, right? Each one of these a web worker. That's a lot of web workers though, right? It's a lot of post messages. I wonder if you could fit all of these into one web worker. Then compose all of their outputs back together. But then the other problem is, what about variables? So variables. So what if, yes, we're subscribing to a signal of streams of events, like clicks, point at intersection, movement, these kind of gestures, throw, yeah. And then the handler will return a payload. So this thing will not directly set variables on it. I mean, it can, but the variables wouldn't be shared. So although you can set internal variables, they're not useful to the outside world. So, for example, if we got, so we can say, okay, this is a constructor. We want to create something. First of all, it's got to run one place. Because if you create the boxes in every headset, no, we do want them. It's a local simulation. We do want them running everywhere. We do want them running everywhere. So let's follow through this tic-tac-toe example. So maybe in the constructor, we create 9 boxes. So, well, maybe not here. We do it in here. It's like on. So we have a switch statement here. On ready. Then let's just make the switch message. Case on ready or something. How do we do this? Case on ready, like that. Okay. Good. So when you're ready, return commands, and these commands will be like a command create box or something, and da da da. So you create these things. And so when the scene is ready, you'll create these boxes. If somebody arrives late, they'll still get her on ready. It'll create these boxes, but then maybe or you'll get the state from someplace. Let me see. Do we want to create the box? So when you pull this in, it's like on ready. Hmm. Okay, so let's say that this creates objects in the scene graph because it returns back and it's interpreted. And we also want to set some variables, right? So set variables become, whatever. It can be key, which is whatever. Isn't this the same thing as what I was doing before? No, but the logic can be different. So you're setting a variable somewhere in the key. The key is like 0, 0, and the value can be like null or something. Okay. But then, let's say you get a message because they did a on click. Okay. And what do we want to do here? So you can use logic now. So if case on click. Okay, so maybe it's a pattern that is more like, let's say on. Okay, so the message, you get a message and a payload, and let's say that the message is on point, and the payload contains the name and the tag of the thing. Sure. So if the name, well, we can identify the variable. So if so we can't actually check our variables because we set them out there. So I think we need variables here, right? So we can say our box, or you can say let 0, let box 0, 1 is nil or null. Do it for every every one of the locations, and then if if payload name and you want to, so I think it's better if you did like an array, then you can access it. So you can say let boxes equal, and first one, and then you got like, you know, 3 of them here, or no, that kind of thing. So if so we can have boxes out here, public boxes, and then this boxes, and then if this boxes is nothing, if not this boxes at, you know, we get the name, we'll split it with the row and the column. If it's not set, then you can set it. So you're setting this thing, right? And then set variable, you export that. You could say boxes is this boxes. So in which case we've got some state, you can control it here, and then you're sending it out. In fact, you could say just variables, and you could say scene. So it doesn't need a command. You can just say that the scene is made of box 1, box 2. It's just boxes. So then it will go and create those boxes at those positions. In fact, you can fetch from memory. So fetch from memory. Can we do this? Maybe it's on instantiate the first time. So it's like on create. On create. Then you send these back. If it's just like on resume, because the thing has already been created, then it will just pick up the state automatically. Because because this thing has to publish a kind of mini scene graph, some serialization, and it has variables. So all of that could be serialized somewhere. So anybody joining the scene late can just, hey, does this thing exist somewhere? Give me the stuff that I can initialize it with, and then so maybe that just goes into on create case on resume, that you say you don't return anything. You just say this dot boxes equal the payload dot boxes, and something like that. Like you'll get it back. Okay, that's not too bad. So you have some variables. So I think maybe it's better if you just publish public variables. It has to be a map. And then inside you could have this variables boxes. Boxes can be like that. And then you publish variables. It's just the variables. Okay. And on resume, you don't need anything because variables will get copied in, and anything that you have put into the scene will be put out into the scene. So we don't need this. So the on resume happens for free. So you say on create these things. And this is like a type thing. You have to return the scene and you have to return the variables. So what if we need to add something? So you probably need to create X or create O. And neither of these things can actually create it real time. You've got to create a message that is then finally composed and returned back. So you have a return payload. And so all of these just create X on the payload, create O on the payload, and then your thing is tacked on to other things that are returned to the front end, which then may result in some of these variables being sent over to the gen server. I think you could create an imperative game with this. Create things, you listen for things, you can have some timing in here, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend you create your timing in a declarative way. So you hand back something that says create a timer. So this is kind of like half and half, right? So you have a declarative payload, but you get to imperatively control the logic, and the imperative side is executed inside the web worker. And then if you have multiple of these things, be them guns or whatever, game. You can bring a tic-tac-toe game. So give back all kinds of params. So the params can be you can define like public sound take a turn sound URL is string, for example, and then params can pass that in. So then you can say this take a turn is params whatever take a turn sound URL.